almost 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. So again, this is a special edition of Thursdays at 3, where we will be discussing the new COVID-19 legislative landscape. We're joined by an excellent team of panelists this afternoon and guest moderator Caroline Seaver, the ASCE Director of Government Relations. We do have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to review. Due to the number of participants today, we've automatically muted your phones to eliminate interferences. Please enter any questions or comments into the chat box. If you have something to add to the conversation, please note it in the chat box and we'll call on you. You could also send questions via email to professional@asce.org. So some of you may not see a chat box, or maybe you're calling in. So again, if you'd still like to ask questions, you can send them to professional@asce.org. Please close all other applications, especially email, so that your system will run smoothly. And also, please keep all conversations geared towards the benefit of the community and today's topic. So again, here to discuss the new COVID-19 legislative landscape, I will turn it over to Caroline.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining this week's edition of ASCE's Thursday at 3 webinar. Today's webinar is going to provide an opportunity to learn about how the current health crisis has impacted two of the nation's most vital infrastructure sectors, our roads and highways, as well as our water utilities. Both sectors have been hard hit by the recent pandemic and are still awaiting relief from the federal government, similar to measures that have been already put into place for the nation's transit agencies and airports. Our speakers today will share how state departments of transportation and local water utilities are coping with the new fiscal realities, and discuss what congressional action is needed to help agencies through the immediate crisis. However, while federal assistance is necessary for both the transportation and water sectors as they navigate their way through the COVID-19 landscape, each sector is facing their own unique challenges. State DOTs are estimated to lose approximately 30% of transportation revenues over the next 18 months, while water utilities expect to see billions of dollars in lost revenue due to water shutoff suspensions and the restoration of service, as well as a loss in revenue from a decrease in industrial and business water usage. But while these revenues are severely declining, the needs for the nation's infrastructure continue to grow, and the nation cannot risk state DOTs and water utilities laying off employees and delaying critical projects. Therefore, ASC has been working closely with partners like the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO, and the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, or NACWA, to ensure that the nation's DOTs and water agencies receive vital short-term relief from the federal government, in addition to our long-term priorities to continue to grow these programs. Most recently, ASC has ardently advocated for the relief of state DOTs, sending a letter to congressional offices and contacting well over 100 members' offices about the need to provide $50 billion in immediate funding for these critical state agencies. Meanwhile, ASC has also been strongly advocating for immediate federal assistance to cover costs associated with moratoriums on water service disconnections or reconnections, as well as grants or low-interest loans to support operations. Furthermore, ASC is continuing to work with Congress and the administration to urge them to prioritize our nation's infrastructure as we get people back to work, using the economic slowdown to make strategic and sorely needed investments that strengthen the foundation of our economy. So with that said, we have an excellent panel with us today. Our first speaker that you'll be hearing from is Brandi Hendrickson. She's the Deputy Director of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Prior to joining AASHTO, Brandi served as the Deputy Administrator at the Federal Highway Administration and the Deputy Commissioner at the Indiana DOT, and we are grateful for her to join us here today. Next, we have Roger Molar, an ASC Director at-large Director and the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Washington since 2016. Following Roger, we'll have Christina Surface, the Managing Director of Government Affairs at the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, which is a trade association representing publicly owned wastewater and stormwater treatment agencies. Prior to joining NACWA, Christina worked for Senator Tammy Baldwin, as well as in the private sector focused on water issues. And then last but not least, we have Rebecca Shelton, ASC Region 5 Governor and the Assistant Director at Gwinnett County Department of Water Resources in Georgia, where she oversees the assessment, maintenance, and rehabilitation of the county's water, sewer, and stormwater assets. And then before we actually turn over to our paddle, if anyone on this call would like to continue to be kept up to date with all of the action happening on Capitol Hill, please look into becoming an ASCE Key Contact. That program provides alerts on the most pressing congressional action, as well as training on how to become a better advocate for the civil engineering profession. Actually, right now, we have an active alert asking our key contacts to reach out in support of state DOTs and in support of the ASHTO request that we'll be hearing a bit more from on Brandi. So if you're interested in contacting your legislators on that topic, I'll actually be sharing the link on how to do that in the chat box. So with that, I will turn it over to Brandi.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and really thank you so much for ASCE's support of ASHTO's request for $50 billion in backstop funding for state DOTs. ASCE is a really important partner of ours and of all of state DOTs, and so we really appreciate that support. State DOTs really have been at the forefront of the COVID-19 response, and we're hearing from many of our states that they're performing functions that they never would have anticipated. Some are building field hospitals, some are volunteering to staff unemployment call centers, for example. And then, of course, we have all of our state DOTs that are really working hard to ensure that the transportation system is open for business so that critical supplies can get where they need to go to serve the American people. So the state DOTs are very active in providing assistance and responding to this pandemic. We're seeing, across the country, significant reduced travel and significantly lower traffic volume, which means significantly less transportation revenue at the state level. And I will say that, we're seeing a slight, ever so slight uptick in traffic volumes over the last week or so. But really, in some parts of the country, we are seeing as much as a 50% or more reduction in traffic volumes. And really that translates to a significant loss of revenue at the state level. And really what reduced revenue means is fewer projects, potential layoffs and furloughs of state DOT employees, and really also will have a pretty significant impact to the private sector, both on the consulting side as well as the construction side. So we really, before we can even start the conversation about investing in infrastructure to stimulate the economy or look to the next reauthorization of the surface transportation programs, we have to make sure that we can backfill these revenue losses so we can maintain the baseline and we won't dig ourselves into an even bigger hole that we have to get out of. We know that state DOTs need to be financially healthy to be able to implement a reauthorization program or a stimulus program. And so this backstop funding is critical to be able to do that. Just as transit agencies, airports, and airlines have received emergency relief from Congress, state DOTs need help too. So that has led ASHTO to requesting $49.95 billion in backstop funding for state DOTs. Those dollars are necessary to cover anticipated revenue losses. And this amount is based on an estimated 30% reduction over an 18-month period. So we know that the decreases are more substantial in the early months as opposed to over the 18-month period. So that 30% really does represent an average over the course of the next 18-month period. Part of the request that that we made to Congress, it asks for flexibility that allows state DOTs to use those funds on a wide range of DOT activities, including construction, of course, but also matching funds for federal aid projects and operations and maintenance support as well. We know that state revenues really are, used on a wide range of activities at the state DOT level, and it's really important that as we are considering backstop funds that replace those lost revenues, that states have the flexibility to be able to use as they need to. We also asked for sensible reporting requirements. We know that red tape really does stifle productivity of state DOTs and typically does not add value. And we also asked that the obligation of funds would be made available until September 30th of 2021, because we know that the needs will be out there until then, but also states have put some of their projects on hold at this point, and it'll take them a minute to get back ramped up and ready to go. We did conduct a survey of our state DOTs within the last month, and the responses that we got back indicated a very wide range of needs. We have some states who are accelerating construction, but we've already seen an impact to many construction projects, and several DOTs have even furloughed or laid off employees. And we know that as we speak today, right now, really difficult decisions are being made at the state DOT level on summer letting schedules and on abilities to deliver capital programs even over the next few years. So a lot of our state DOT directors and commissioners are really having to make some very difficult decisions now, and they're really looking to the federal government to really be able to provide some relief. We have asked that our members reach out to their congressional delegations in each of their states. We know that members of Congress really do respond to what's going on in their districts, and having our state DOTs educate them on the impact back home is really critical to helping them understand the need. We've also been working very closely with our industry partner coalition, and as was mentioned, ASCE is a great supporter of ours and a great partner of ours, and we do have a lot of support from a lot of other national associations. And getting industry groups engaged at the state level has also been something that we've been trying to do, because it's so important that they are able to convey the potential impact to the private sector, to the congressional delegations as well. And we really do feel like that our work on the Hill has been very productive. Many of the conversations that we've had have turned from, trying to understand why states need these dollars, to more of a how can we get something like this implemented, or what are some details that we can work out. So we feel like we're feeling cautiously optimistic about how the conversations have been going, but we also know that there are lots of competing needs. You all know this as well, and Congress has been hearing from a lot of different groups about needs that are out there. So we know that we've heard that we may see a bill from the House very soon, and we just urge you that if this is something that you recognize as being very important, that you can work to reach out to your congressional delegation as well. And before we get into any questions, I just also wanted to mention that you can look for yourself at our AASHTO request, letters that have been submitted to congressional delegations from their states, and letters of support from the industry on our website at transportation.org. And it's under the Transportation Policy Forum page under the COVID-19 link. So with that, I really do appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all, and happy to answer your questions when it's time to do that. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Brandi. Roger, why don't we turn it over to you?
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks, Brandi, for kind of starting this out. I'm Roger Molar, Secretary of Transportation for Washington State. We're a multimodal transportation organization, as are our colleagues at AASHTO, so we are appreciative of the federal support we've received for our transit operations, our aviation operations, and our Amtrak Cascades intercity passenger rail. But being a multimodal agency, we have a mission, and continuity of operations has been the first thing on our mind. And a big part of that is keeping our people safe. Most of our employees are teleworking today, which is a very different experience for them, but it's been successful. It's been vastly successful. And in polling our team, about 75% of them want to do some of that going forward. But we have folks that need to be out in the field operating our Washington State ferry system, keeping our safety rest areas open, responding to incidents, plowing snow, all the different things that a DOT does. We began tracking our numbers related to the pandemic from the very get-go. And what we've seen is traffic volumes on our highways are down about 50%. We were the first state to be hit by this, and we were hit hard. Traffic volumes are down about 50%. We have a lot of tolled facilities, and our tolled facilities are down over 70%. The people who ride Washington State ferries, 70% of them are not riding just right now. But we're still providing that service because a lot of our communities are island communities, and there are a lot of essential workers that need to get back and forth across the Puget Sound. Our Amtrak Cascade service, ridership is down 95%. And we cover that service. 60% of Amtrak Cascades is paid for by fares. 75% of our ferries operating costs are paid for by fares. Our tolling is how we've paid for those facilities. And everything we do is covered by state revenue. The federal share of our budget is about 15% now. When we were building the interstate, it was a very different day, but about 15% federal. So we're raising all of it here in Washington State. And when people stay home and stay healthy, which is what we need them to do in response to this pandemic, they don't buy gas, they don't buy tickets, they don't buy cars. And so what we've estimated is we are losing about $100 million a month in transportation revenue here in Washington State. And that's going to have a profound impact depending on how deep and how long the pandemic and the recession that has come with the pandemic last. We've taken some immediate actions. We've got a hiring freeze in place. We've got a travel freeze in place. We're deferring consulting contracts. We're deferring equipment purchases and the like, but that's really small potatoes when you look at our budget. That $100 million a month, that's about 40% of the revenue that comes to the Washington State DOT. And the only way you make a 40% reduction absent some revenue relief is by deferring capital programs and cutting operating. And we're looking at both. But when you cut operating, the stuff we're talking about is plowing snow, responding to crashes, responding to fires and floods, and all the things that we do in our DOT world. It means providing essential ferry service to communities that are on islands and communities where the drive around, as opposed to taking the ferry, is the entire day. So we're very concerned about this. And one of the things that concerns me as a CEO, and something that my congressional delegation knows and more people are knowing, is there are two issues at play here when you talk about transportation infrastructure. There's the immediate issue of restoring the revenue that's been lost that pays for programs that we already anticipated doing. Bids that we're going to put out, projects we're going to put out to bid, maintenance activity that needs to happen today. We need to talk about that revenue backfill, and we need to address it right now. The other thing we need to think about as a nation is how do we use infrastructure investment coming out of the pandemic and getting into whatever our new normal is. Those issues need to be separate. There are a lot of people that have been talking about, well, we can talk about infrastructure later. This is immediate response that we're talking about. And we need to talk about infrastructure later. But when we talk about infrastructure later, We need to respond to the incredible interest in telecommuting. We need to invest in broadband to make that more attractive. We need to invest in our neighborhoods. I'm fortunate enough that I live in a neighborhood where I can walk to the grocery store, I can ride a bicycle to the pharmacy. Many of us don't live in those neighborhoods, or if we do live in neighborhoods, they don't have the facilities to make it safe to do that. So we need to be thinking about what our investments are going to be there. Freight mobility. One of the things that's been really important to us in Washington State is keeping the highways open to move food, to move goods, to move medical supplies and the like. But somebody else that we're seeing an awful lot is Amazon and UPS on delivering packages to people. And we need to be thinking about how that new reality is going to impact transportation investment coming out. And then safety. What are we doing with, our volumes are down on our highways. Our crash rates aren't, and we're seeing some incredible speeding fatalities. We had someone clocked at 192 miles an hour on one of our highways last week. So what we're looking at here is, again, continuity of service during the crisis, recovery, including the revenue recovery and the immediate need for funding, and then how are we as engineers going to lead American society into the new normal post-pandemic. That's where we're at here in Washington State. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues and answering your questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roger. With that, we'll hold any questions we have on transportation right now, so we can hear from our other two speakers who are going to be focused in on the water sector. And Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So again, my name is Christina. I'm with NACWA, which is a trade association representing public clean water agencies providing wastewater and stormwater services around the U.S. So coronavirus, of course, has underscored the importance of sanitation and protecting public health. And it's also raising awareness of the shortcomings that we have in the U.S. regarding access to water services, and that's getting a lot of traction right now. Right out of the gate, when the pandemic began, we saw water and wastewater utilities moving to suspend shutoffs to households that were unable to pay, reinstating services to households that had previously lost services, doing things like implementing their continuity of operations plans, emergency management efforts, adopting new policies to help their essential workers stay safe and social distance while they were on the job, and get engaged with new efforts like using research of sewage to track COVID-19. Utilities saw an immediate reduction as the pandemic started in non-residential usage, looking around the country, as major institutions like colleges, factories, and commercial districts shuttered. And then as the unemployment
Christina, we can't hear you. It looks like your line is muted.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I'm sorry, I said somebody muted me. Should I start over?
No, we had heard it. We had heard most of it. It was just the last sentence that we missed.
Oh, excellent. Okay, sorry. So I guess I was saying that, in addition to seeing an immediate drop-off in water demand and revenue coming in, also with unemployment rising, utilities started to grow concerned with, rising inability from households to pay. So NACWA has put together estimates of the potential financial impact to clean water agencies. Nationwide, we are expecting to see a 20% loss of revenue on average. That comes out to about $12.5 billion in lost revenue to clean water utilities. And then on top of that, roughly $4 billion in costs for maintaining services to residential households that were unable to pay. The drinking water side, who NACWA works closely with, has also come up with estimates of the impact for the drinking water sector. Their aggregate financial impact for the year is about $13.9 billion. So adding those two together, we're looking at a roughly $30 billion impact from COVID-19 for water and wastewater utilities. So NACWA has identified three sort of buckets of areas where we would like to see financial assistance or federal assistance in terms of the coronavirus response. First is federal assistance to help with covering the costs associated with moratoriums on water service disconnections, the costs with reconnecting households that had lost service, and other actions taken in response to the pandemic. You might be familiar with on the heating and energy, in the heating and energy sector, there's a assistance program, LIHEAP, which provides ratepayer assistance. There's nothing like that on the water ratepayer side, and that's been a priority of us for a while. And this is something that's really gained a lot more traction in the context of the coronavirus response, providing some emergency funding to help utilities maintain those services for people regardless of ability to pay. That's something that in the CARES negotiation got some traction. There was discussion of providing $1.5 billion to utilities for maintaining those services to households. It ultimately did not make it through the CARES package that already passed into law, but we've been continuing to work with Congress and are cautiously optimistic that it will be included in the next proposal that we hope to see here shortly coming from the House. Second bucket area that we are looking at, of course, is straightforward looking at the lost revenue impacts and getting financial assistance to help utilities recover from that. And this really goes hand in hand with, I think, what we're seeing, the concern from the transportation side as well. It's really easy to see how this 20% loss of revenue is ultimately going to put new pressure on raising rates down the line, really makes the water affordability crisis worse, and really have a lot of repercussions on capital investment planning, on staffing decisions, and so on. And so, like I think on the transportation side, we're pushing for, we need a federal response to this now, so that utilities can continue and emerge stronger from this crisis. And then the last maybe bucket of area where we're having these conversations with the Hill is around the potential for economic recovery and the role that water and wastewater investment plays in that. ASC is obviously very familiar with the need for water and wastewater investment in this country, and that's an area where we can see the water wastewater sector playing into creating jobs and strengthening our national economy coming out of this crisis. Maybe I'll stop there, but I think what I'm really struck by is really the similarities across different infrastructure sectors. I think we're raising a lot of the same issues. We just got out of Water Week, which was last week. If you go to waterweek.us, you'll find some more of these resources and information. While Water Week is technically over, the need for continued engagement by folks from around the country, reaching out to their members of Congress, letting them know about the impacts that they're seeing at their local utilities and in their communities, and asking for federal support is very important. And I think that's something that spans multiple sectors.
Thank you so much. Rebecca, we will turn it over to you to hear about the experience that you're currently having in Georgia.
Thank you. I work for Gwinnett County Department of Water Resources. We're a large utility in the metro Atlanta area. We serve a population of just under 1 million people, providing water, sewer, and stormwater services. We do that with an annual budget of about $400 million and a staff of about 600. When all of this started, one of the most difficult things that we had to do was adapt quickly to policy changes. We had local orders, state orders, federal orders, everything was changing very rapidly. One of the first things that happened was some of our neighbors they stopped turning off water for non-payment, as Christina was just talking about. We had to make that decision. We've had to, as a local government, you're kind of expected to be there. Teleworking was not encouraged. And suddenly, in the course of 3 days, we went to almost no one teleworking to over 200 people teleworking, or about a third of our staff. We sent our 24-hour dispatch home with phones and extra monitors. Our customer care call center went home with phones and extra monitors. But then that left 2/3 of our staff that still had to come here because they had jobs like plant operators, maintenance staff. They work out in the field repairing water meters and sewer lines. So what we did with them was we offered a 15% hazard pay. So if they're a field staff and they were required to come in, they got 15% hazard pay. Office staff that were required to come in got 5% hazard pay. We don't really know what the total impact of that's going to be. Any non-essential staff that couldn't telework, we put on paid administrative leave. So we are hoping that we will get some sort of state or federal reimbursement for those extra costs. We did learn quickly that human resources and IT were very critical functions for us as we adapted to payroll, as we adapted to the changes in the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act, how we addressed different employee issues. They became very critical. IT has been fantastic. Our staff immediately embraced Microsoft Teams. I think that will last for a very long time. So I do think there will be some long-term positive things that come out of this as far as teleworking and kind of rethinking how we do business. But from a revenue perspective, it's been a little hard to tell what's going to happen. So anyone who's paying a bill in April, they're really paying the bill for usage in maybe late February or March. So it was a little hard for us to tell at first the impacts on the revenue, but as we got into late April and early this month, we are starting to see a better picture. We did see a 33% decline in commercial usage in April. So commercial usage is about 27% of our revenue normally, which is fortunate for us. Other utilities might have a much higher number for that. So that decline didn't have as big an impact as it could have, but we also saw an 8% increase in residential usage. So the net decrease in revenue was about 5% for the month of April. Right now, while we are not locking people off, we're also not charging late fees. And so every 3 months that we do not charge late fees, we're losing about $1 million in revenue. And we really don't know when we'll be able to start locking people off, when that would be appropriate. We think it's probably at least another 60 to 90 days, possibly after kids go back to school. So I will say, as a civil engineer, like at a water utility, when you're managing a utility, you know that you're putting people's lives at risk every day. You're asking people to go into manholes and trenches and work around heavy machinery. But we were suddenly being asked to make decisions that weren't just impacting the lives of our families, their elderly parents, their children, their spouses. So it's been a heavy time making decisions of who do you bring into work, who do you send out into the field, how do you make all of those decisions. Long-term impacts are the real unknown for us. So far, system development charges have been steady. Those are an indicator of economic growth. So a system development charge is paid every time you buy a new meter for a new house or a new business. And all the way through March and April, we never saw that stop. In fact, we had to keep our inspectors working as essential staff because construction continued through that time. We expect that to drop off. And right now we are in the process of preparing our budget, which we have to present next month. We are expecting to present a rate increase and a bond. And right now we don't really know what's going to happen with that because we don't know if our customers are going to be able to afford that. So what I'm confident is going to happen is that change is going to continue. As most of you know, I'm sure, Georgia opened back up. And while people were very upset about it, they all left their house. Traffic came back immediately. I will say it's very different. We did start bringing staff back into the office, but we have one-way hallways, we have masks, we have disinfectant everywhere. We found that there's some challenges to that, right? Very difficult to get masks, and headsets became a real challenge. Everyone had moved to Microsoft Teams and we realized all our desktops don't have video cameras and microphones. So headsets became suddenly very important in trying to get things like that. And then just really communicating with folks, both the public and with our staff, so that people feel comfortable coming back and going back to work, and that they can do that in a safe way has been a real challenge that we've really worked on and put a lot of thought into. But I'm confident that change is going to continue to happen. I'm also confident that the water industry is going to adapt and that people and rise to the challenge.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Well, with that, we will start opening it up for questions. As people start to think about their questions, and please feel free to put them into the chat box. I do have one that I will kick off with. And this is one is really directed toward both Brandi and Christina. You both mentioned in your remarks that legislation might be coming soon from the House. Can you expand a little bit more on what that legislation might look like? You mentioned the House, you did not mention the Senate. How are negotiations going with the Senate? And we have seen different numbers out there. For example, the nation's governors have said that about $500 billion is necessary for states. Where do transportation agencies, where do water sectors fall in that request? So anything further that you can expand on what we might be seeing coming forward would be helpful.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So we really see AASHTO's $50 billion ask as being separate yet complementary to the governor's ask of $500 billion. The governor's estimates are based on, generally general fund revenues that typically go to the states, and so many state DOT functions are really supported by a dedicated tax revenue, and so dedicated revenue stream. So we really see our $50 billion ask as something separate, but complementary to the governors. We know that there are a lot of competing needs in states, and if there isn't specific funding, dedicated for this loss of transportation revenues, then we are really concerned that the funds that will come to the states will be used on COVID response and other activities. So we're really pushing for this dedicated pot of money to go directly to state DOTs, and really intend for it to be used very flexibly, not like your normal federal aid type funding, but really as a replacement for lost state revenues that could be used for a wide range of activities, including construction, but also operations and maintenance, and more on the administrative side. So we're hoping that we see that in the bill. We hope that the funding levels really are what states need to be able to maintain their existing construction programs and maintain their operations.
Thank you. Christina, anything further on that, or we can move on to another question?
Sure. I guess I would just say on the water utility side, we kind of similarly see our ask as potentially similar but separate but complementary to the push for local municipal funding. Of course, in the U.S., we're overwhelmingly looking at local government that can be structured in different ways, whether as municipal or regional authorities. And so, it's depending on how the House chooses to move forward on the legislation, potentially either is ensuring eligibility for water and wastewater utilities as part of that local assistance, or ideally a dedicated funding specific for water and wastewater utility needs. So that's kind of our push in this next phase of funding, where all signs are pointing to we're going to see additional information on what the House wants to move forward with here, probably by tomorrow. A separate piece of that is hopefully on the ratepayer assistance side of things, probably paired with some sort of federal moratorium on shutoffs. So we're kind of looking for potential support for water in two different ways in that package.
Thank you. We have a question. Do we have any more comments on that? We have a question here from Ernie Hemsfield, who is asking how the current financial situation will impact future research funding for universities. I know that this is something that ASC is already starting to think about when it comes to just long-term research. For example, in our request for potential programs that could be included in a long-term stimulus package, we have included the reauthorization of NIST in that. Have any of you, maybe Roger yourself or Christina Hasnakwa, looked into potential impacts on some of the research that your organizations or the state DOT might be involved in?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, at this point, we're looking at all the options that are on the table in terms of things we might not be able to do if the funding's not there. But a lot of our funding is, as Brandi indicated, transportation funding tends to be dedicated funding, and some of that dedicated funding comes with strings attached to it, and that's entirely appropriate. And a lot of the research that we do with funding that is dedicated for research purposes. What will be interesting to see coming out of the pandemic is what our legislature does with state resources. When you look at the general fund problems they have, in addition to the transportation fund problems that they have, and what the Congress does when they move from emergency response mode to what are the long-term financial implications of all of this for the federal budget.
I would agree with that. We had a number of research projects ongoing right now, and we had to, during this time, figure out how to do that because we didn't want, for example, if it's happening at a treatment plant and we suddenly don't want anyone around our operators, that certainly is not a priority over running the plant. So we've had to do some short-term planning, and then we're starting to look at long-term. If our budget goes down, I can imagine our research budget will get cut fairly quickly, honestly.
And then Roger, while we're on the topic of state budgets, you working for a state agency, have you had any conversations at this point with the governor, with the state legislature? Are they going to be coming in, having a special session, trying to work through what the budget will be looking like? Are they coming in for a special session in order to allocate some of these federal dollars that have already come to the state? I know North Carolina had a special session last week to allocate some of their COVID-19 relief dollars. There's a big question of whether or not the funding that they've already received could actually be used for state DOTs. Have there been similar conversations in Washington?
Yeah, well, you know, my boss, Jay Inslee, the governor of the state of Washington, has been leading on this for weeks now and doing a remarkable job. But he's been doing that, keeping the legislative leadership in the loop. There's certainly ongoing conversations. I'm in continuous contact with the leadership, the chairs and the ranking members of both the House and the Senate Transportation Committees. Our assumption is that there's going to be a special session. You know, transportation is my world, and I'm very concerned about that. But you know, we've got our general fund too, and the latest financial analysis is that we're somewhere between $7 and $8 billion in the hole over the next 4 years in terms of our general fund budget. And that's looking at the current biennium, the 1921 biennium, and then the biennium to come in 21-23. To balance those two biennia, because we have a requirement that our budget balances over 4 years, we're $6, $7, $8 billion. That's significant. And that's why our governor and the NGA have been asking for relief as well. So yeah, there's going to be a special session. The extent to which the legislature dives into the transportation budget, I don't know at this point, and that's why I think it's going to be a while out.
Thank you. We have another question here in the chat box from Stu Mooring. He is wondering, and I think this is a question probably for Brandi and Christina, since the federal government often has the same source of funds as many states do, how we propose that the federal government would pay for some of this financial assistance that's coming out. We are seeing a lot of this money, trillions have already been spent in previous COVID packages. A lot of it is coming out from deficit spending. Christina, Brandi, I don't know if you have anything further on that.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had the answer to that.
Yeah.
I think, we're seeing like unprecedented levels of spending coming out, of Washington, but really, I wouldn't have I think that there's recognition that there are so many needs at this point, and getting some of this relief funding is critical to stabilizing a lot of different sectors within our country. So I think how to pay for it is not top of mind right now in Washington. But it's a great question that I do not have the answer for.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Brandi said. And, as a trade association, we're not telling Congress where they should get their money from. We're just representing what the needs are and, asking that they be considered alongside the other priorities. We have seen, major spending, some of that going to certain state and local needs, but overwhelmingly for private sector needs. And so we're, pushing alongside, making sure that the needs of the public, local, and state various entities are being heard.
Thank you very much. And then a question from Teresa Harrison that Rebecca and Roger, this might be best suited for you. They're wondering, she's wondering if there are best practices or recommended references for procedures that can be considered as we start to reopen public offices. Rebecca, I know your office has already been reopened. Being in Georgia, you've hit on this a bit. If you have specific guidance that you've used that could be helpful for others, or Roger, if you could share what guidance that Washington might be looking at as you start to more broadly reopen offices, I think that would be helpful for Teresa.
One of the things, we focus first on staff, like how to bring the staff back, and then we're focusing on how to bring the public back. We closed our lobby in late March, and we have not yet reopened our lobby. We do have a drive-through that is open, but we expect we'll probably open our lobby next week. Some of the things we look at from the public side is obviously some of the same signage you've seen at the grocery store with the showing people what 6 feet apart is, but limiting the number of people in the lobby, having plexiglass partitions, not just between the customer and our staff, but also between customers at windows, or only opening every other window, things like that. As far as our staff goes, there was a great document that we came across from Cushman and Wakefield called a how-to guide for reopening your workplace recovery readiness, and we really followed a lot of the things in there. So we made a lot of our narrow hallways one way. We right now just brought back half of our staff at a time, so only every other cube is filled at any given time. Everyone wears masks in common areas. None of our conference rooms are open. All of our meetings are still via Teams, even if we're in the office. We're really following social distancing. And then making sure, one of the really key things is communicating that to your staff, because they need to know that you are really trying to bring them back safely. So we sent things out to explain what we were doing to try to help them as they came back and protect them as they came back. And then we did have a little fun with it. The first day back, several of us dressed as cowboys, and we had bandanas as our masks, and we kind of greeted people and said, hey, follow the one-ways, make sure that you're wearing a mask in all common areas. So we really tried to lighten the mood a little bit, because it is a pretty difficult time.
Yeah, that sounds like some great stuff happening in Georgia. Here in Washington State, we're following the lead of our public health professionals. We have a State Department of Health. We have a State Department of Labor and Industries, is kind of like the state level OSHA. And what we have to consider as employers is our employees have rights, and being in a safe work environment is one of their rights. So what we did as an agency, we started with construction. When we shut down construction, we went back to just essential services, running the few ferry boats that we were running and providing, incident response and snow plowing and the like. And we made sure that our people had the best available information and the best available PPE, personal protective equipment. So masks and sanitizer and wash stations and that kind of thing. But what we did with our construction roundtable, again, this is the governor's leadership. He brought the construction industry in. He brought the labor community in, the building trades, the various labor union groups. He brought the owners in, people like us, and we sat down and we hammered out for construction what are the safety plan requirements, what are the equipment requirements, what are the monitoring requirements to allow us to go back to work. So construction is up and running. We've applied that to our maintenance activity because a lot of what we do is out in the field. And we've also applied that to our field engineering, what we do in the field in support of project development. So all of that is going on, and we're thinking about coming back into the office as later. And when we come back into the office, we'll have similar protections for our office employees. One of the things that's really important, the notion about that Rebecca brought up about communicating, we have to be as open and transparent as we can be with our employees about what we know and what we don't know and when we think we're going to know. And you have to be having those conversations. I've been telling my team, we have to be calm. Whether we actually feel calm or not, as leaders, we have to appear calm and exude some calm for your folks. You really need to give your people information. They're hungry for it. If you don't fill that vacuum with good, viable information, they're going to go to other places. And as we all know, there are crazy places that people go to for information. And you have to be kind. This is a time people react differently to this. It's fear. Some people react to fear with anger. And so I have angry employees that call and yell at me. And then they call back and go, oops, I was yelling at the Secretary of Transportation. I go, yeah, but you're cool. It's okay. There are other people, the reaction is to just, they collapse. They just, they're in a corner. We need to be kind to our employees and our customers as we work through this together. So as far as resources, the Centers for Disease Control, the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, go to their web pages. There's all sorts of information. Our state health department, all sorts of information. Our state, and probably your state too, a lot of that is the responsibility of the county health department. So we find that we have different requirements for our offices depending on which county in the state of Washington we're in. But the place to get that information is from the government agencies. I mean, the Cushman and Wakefield thing is great. Somebody over there in their spare time probably went and grabbed all this government stuff and put a Cushman and Wakefield label on it. Good for them. I mean, that's good stuff. But remember that you have an obligation, a moral obligation as a leader. You also have legal obligations as employers, and make sure you've got the best information to work with.
Thank you very much. We have spent a lot of time as part of this conversation talking about the critical, immediate, short-term relief for transportation agencies and water utilities. But earlier this month, or I guess it was last month at this point, we had start to hear rumblings about more of the recovery phase, where we heard Speaker Pelosi and President Trump both talking about trying to move an infrastructure package. Just yesterday, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee did pass out of committee unanimously a Water Resources Development Act. As we are starting to think about long-term economic recovery and infrastructure, are you all hearing that infrastructure is still a part of that conversation? Will there still be a broader infrastructure bill? Or are we going to see Congress starting to try to piecemeal move pieces of infrastructure legislation, such as a WRDA bill, a FAST Act reauthorization? I throw that out to all of you.
Well, for AASHTO, certainly first and foremost, our number one priority, far and above everything else, is the relief funding. And if that in any way, if anything else, whether it's stimulus or reauthorization, detracts from that, we don't really, we don't want to be talking about that right now, because we think it's so important that that backstop funding is made available to states. Because having a solid foundation for states to be able to deliver a future stimulus or to deliver a future reauthorization will require this backstop funding. So we have heard, as many of you have, discussions about reauthorization or about stimulus. If you'd asked me 3 months ago what our priority was, it would absolutely have been a long-term sustainable surface transportation reauthorization program, because the FAST Act does expire here at the end of September. But in order to get to that, and in order for states to be able to deliver something like that, we really need that backstop funding. So that's absolutely our priority, and how we're spending our days right now.
Yeah, and likewise for NACWA, stimulus response and COVID response has absolutely become our top priority, which of course a few months ago we would have thought the Water Resources Development Act would have been our main focus for this year. We were pleased with EPW moving forward with the WRDA markup yesterday. That was a strong bipartisan bill that has important reauthorizations for the clean water sector, most notably the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which has a long expired authorization. So that would increase funding for that over the next coming years. So really pleased with that, but that was really written in the context of several months ago, pre-coronavirus. And so, if that is to be an infrastructure package, that wasn't designed to meet the emergency needs, both to have short-term funding and to be the scale of need that's out there right now. And so while that may very well become what ultimately moves and is framed as an infrastructure package, we don't believe that is going to be enough. But it is really important. I mean, I continue to emphasize on the drinking water and wastewater side, the federal cost share of infrastructure in this country is less than 5%. It's very low. It's overwhelmingly paid for by local ratepayers and by the states. And so increasing that, particularly in the context of the coronavirus response, is really our top priority right now.
Yeah, from my perspective here in Washington State, what we need right now is relief. So let's address relief. What we need going forward is investment. But let's make sure that we're investing with the new normal in mind. The truckers, I do a lot of work with the Washington Trucking Association. The truckers say it is a great time to be driving a truck in Washington State because they're not running into the congestion they used to run into. And they've had an aha moment. Travel demand management actually works for us in the trucking community. They have advocated for more, wider, faster, and they're saying, wow, we can add capacity to the system by investing in telecommuting. We can add capacity to the system by investing in people walking and people biking. I just put our traffic and travel impact page up. Traffic is down, ferries are down, tolling is down. You know what's up? Walking and bicycling are way, way up. And if we can enable the people who want to telecommute. I have an employee that emailed me and said, I used to spend 10 to 20 hours a week commuting. I've got that part of my life back. I'm spending that time with my children instead of my car. And I'm just as productive at home. But I also have people that work for me that can't be productive at home because they don't have access to high-speed internet. So when we talk about an investment package coming out of this, we need to talk about a 21st century investment package that learns from this crisis, that learns from what we know now that we didn't know when we were implementing the Eisenhower interstate system. A package of projects that are rooted in the 1950s is not going to move our society and our economy forward. A package of investment that's rooted in today and tomorrow's reality could be a lot more powerful. And it's going to take time to have that discussion. So let's take that time, but let's not take time on the relief. Get us the money now so that we can keep the doors open and the lights on and the people we serve.
Thank you so much, Roger. I want to conclude with just one final question. What can ASCE members be doing to help move the ball on getting this relief package through Congress? Rebecca, Roger, you're both ASCE members. You're familiar with some of the systems that we have in place. How do you recommend your fellow members get engaged?
Rebecca, you want to go first?
Sure. The Key Contact program is fabulous, and it really helps. It helps me understand better what's happening at the federal level. And then over the years, I've been able to develop relationships with some of my elected officials, and I can contact them directly, and they really do listen. If you contact them as a citizen and as a civil engineer and an expert in your field, they really do listen. So I found that very effective.
Yeah, I agree. The Key Contact program is great. I've been involved in putting report cards together. I've been involved in Key Contact and the rest. Our associations that are represented on the call today, they are a vital part of communicating with Congress. But as effective as a communicator as Brandi is, Brandi doesn't vote in our delegations districts. What they want to hear from is their constituents. And when they hear from their constituents who happen to be civil engineers, who happen to be members of ASCE, who happen to be subject matter experts on this, and they hear a message from you that's similar to my message and Brandi, they go, oh, they mean it. And not only do they mean it, but the people who vote for me or not care about this issue. So the Key Contact program is a great place to get information. It's a great place to get who to contact, what to stress. The staff at ASCE does a marvelous job with that, but you got to make the phone call. You got to send the email. That's how it gets done.
Thank you so much to both of you. And with that, Teresa, I'm not sure if you have any last minute housekeeping items. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar. And I know there'll be another one next Thursday at 3. And I believe Teresa's already shared the registration information on that one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and stay safe and healthy, everyone.
All right, take care.